Right. So this is an interesting session, and whoever we talked to, had a view on what we should be doing on in the panel today. So I'm sure you will have a lot of views as well, and so let's get it let's get it kicking, right? So for those of you from India, if I just say my name, you will be able to guess 99% of the time where I am from, right? So if I just say my first name, I could pass off as Shah Rukh Khan, but but with my full name, Rajagopalan Raghavan, you will certainly know I have to be from either Tamil Nadu or Kerala, right? So when I start speaking Hindi, people taken aback and say, "You can really speak Hindi?" And then they didn't try to figure out where my accent is. So they say, "Well, you don't have a South Indian accent." I said, "That's only for the Hindi movies." Real Hindi-speaking South Indians don't speak like "Kahan ja raha hai?" So we speak a lot better than that. And then, some of my friends tell me, "Oh, so you have this nice combination of a Haryanvi and a Marathi Hindi in it." I said, "Okay, I can understand Marathi, but where does Haryanvi come from? I don't know." So whether you like it or not, so what we try and do in our own heads is, okay, so this is Shraddhanjali Rao. Oh, is she a Telugu-speaking Rao, or could she be Marathi? Could she be Kannada? She could be anything. And then you're trying to kind of mental map and saying, all right, so I'm very comfortable with Raj because he can speak Haryanvi, he can speak Marathi. By the way, he's from Chennai. And the best part is if I speak Tamil, people don't believe that I'm from Chennai. So there's this kind of bias, or conscious or not, that goes on. The second one is about math skills, right? So when I used to live in the US, they say, "You're Indian, you should be really good in math." I'm saying, "No, I'm not. That was my least favorite subject." "Oh, but you're not even an engineer?" Well, that's what my dad didn't like. My dad used to teach in IIT Madras. And for him, it was like, if you're not an engineer, you don't get one meal in a day. And if you're not an engineer from IIT Madras, you don't get 2 meals in a day. And so there were many days I went hungry. So some of those typecasting goes on. The one thing that took the cake was when I started working, that was several hundred years ago. That's my humor, you can smile. Was someone said, "So you're a Mumbai Tamil, right?" I'm saying, "Yeah, you can say that." You know what? Mumbai Tamils are less political than Mylapore Tamils. I'm saying, "Oh, really? What kind of politicians did you see from Mylapore?" They were all failed politicians, by the way. I'm saying, okay, where do I get? So the other big one that goes on is, that was when I was working for Amazon, and we would hire. And I know Mr. Singh is here, Dada of technology companies, but anyone who we try to hire, everybody else would ask, "Is this guy from the tech industry or not?" "Oh, brick and mortar, nahi chalega boss, they won't understand techies." I'm saying, "Oh, well, we all speak the same language." I mean, we eat the same food. We love our masala dosa and, paneer butter masalas. And so where does that come from? Now, the biggest problem with some of these is, and there are these poll questions that will come, is some of these are conscious biases, and some of these are unconscious biases. Now, I have my own theory. My theory is no bias is unconscious. Every bias that you have is as conscious as it can be, right? To the extent that someone was saying, if you have a mind and if you are a human being, you have to have a bias. Otherwise, there's nothing, right? So machines are not biased, is what finally they came to a conclusion. Even that got thwarted. So this Monday, I was sitting on my Monday morning trip coming from Bangalore to Delhi. My home is still Bangalore. And there's Economic Times, there's this chief of AI of Microsoft that says, we need to teach our machines to not be biased. Okay, so who's not biased? And one of the things I think that got me my job in Indigo was all the smart answers I gave on technology. And one of them was using AI in recruiting. And I know I floored the board of directors and Aditya Ghosh, who was the CEO then, and Roland, who's sitting right at the back, and how we used AI. Now, today I was just scrolling through my LinkedIn page, and there it says Amazon just junked their AI tool on recruiting because it was biased against women. I'm saying, okay, so the humans are biased, the machines are biased, who are not? So I said, the good part of being a moderator is I don't have to answer the questions, and I can simply ask some of the questions, and we have a great panel here. We have Aditya, who's worked in multinational companies and in Indian company, Shalini, who's worked outside the country and just about moved here, Shraddha, who's a young leader from SAP, and Shivdeep from Sodexo. So I'm going to start from you, Shraddha. As a millennial leader, what biases, conscious or otherwise, have you faced?
Okay. Afternoon session, right? So let's make it a bit interesting. How many millennials in the room? Hands go up, please. There are more. Yeah, I'd like to believe you. Yes, exactly. That's the point. It's in the mind. It's in the mind.
And Aditya also says he just promised to be a millennial, not honest.
Millennials have such a stigma attached to it, right? We've branded millennials to the core. Instant gratification, no patience, technology kids. I mean, everything possible in life. So the one that I took over the role about 18 months ago. And, the first thing, and I must say, somebody very kind came and finally told me this, saying, you look too young for this role. Okay? I literally did not have a reaction because I didn't know how to react. And mind you, I've been with this organization 10 years. And this is not my first company either, right? Of course, I took over this role from, some of you would know him, Bhuvan, for example, very, very senior leaders, salt and pepper turned to salt.
Yeah. He was 150 years old when I met him 20 years ago. So,
so that's something that, that's the first thing they said. But the silver lining that I found in that statement? They said, you look too young. I said, look, I can fix. So next time I landed up for an all-hands meeting, I was prim and proper, with a bindi, with a suit. I said, look, I can fix, right? So that's something that you do as a part of the story. But what's important underlying for me, the learning I made, there were two parts of the story. Look, I could fix. But the second, age was not a battle I will ever win. There were people in the room whose professional experience was more than my age. And I could never win this. And in spite, and as an HR professional, I moved out of HR and into business multiple times, did multiple stints, and I've seen this. The first meeting, bias is out there. You like it, you don't like it, it's there. You're getting judged. If you can make your point, understand the person, the second meeting is a savior. Third one, you're either written off or you're in the team, right? I think that was my learning. So there will be bias. That was very obvious. I think there was few things that I learned and I did as well in terms of trying to break these myths with millennials. So we did a few things, which I'm happy to share. But in terms of how do you bring this multi-generational workforce together? We have 5 generations today at our company, and it's not easy. And it's politically very incorrect, which nobody will talk about. But these are things that we need to be real about, right?
No, absolutely. And you will continue to have these questions for the next 20 years till we guys retire. So brace up for it in terms of you being a millennial or not. Aditya, I've often heard that there is an alibi to our bias, and the alibi is cultural competence. I'm culturally competent, and you think I'm biased. What do you think, Aditya?
I'll tell you a story. I first international job that I got, been made global head of operations, and I did what every global leader does: create a vision, put 6 things on a PowerPoint, and I got on a flight. The first place I went was Indonesia. I went there. I had a team of over 14 people whom I was meeting for the first time. I met them, shared my vision, the grand vision, and then had dinner with the CEO in Indonesia. And he asked me how was the day. And I told him how the day went and how everybody accepted the vision so beautifully, and there's perfect alignment, and I'll see him after 6 months. And he mentioned something saying, look, I'm going to see you I'll see you next month. I didn't understand it at that point of time. So we parted ways, and a month later I was back there because nothing had happened. And this time I knew that my first port of call was to go meet up with Peter and say, hey, you knew something that I didn't. Tell me a little bit more about it. And I think that was my first lesson in terms of cultural sensitivity. I kind of assumed that the way I understand, accept things is the way everybody else understands and accepts things. What I learned there was this team, there was just so much power distance between us. They didn't want to offend me in any way, so they accepted whatever I had said. They didn't believe in it. They didn't want to execute it, but they accepted it. And for me, what was important was learning how to kind of get around it. Getting out there, working with them, spending a little extra time, building consensus, ensuring that the way they see how we can do it, was a big learning for me from a culture standpoint. And I think culture is a real, the bias is a real thing. It's there. We kind of automatically take it for granted that some people behave in some manner, some people behave in another manner. Working in London, I realized another thing. British speak English, Indians speak English, and they're different. Right? So if your boss came and told you saying, hey, Aditya, not bad. The work that you've just submitted is not bad. Indians view as, hey, I'm one rater. It was not bad, it was excellent. Mm-hmm. Right? What he's saying, it was horrible, I want to fire you, but I'm just too sophisticated to say So there are elements which are cultural, and if you are not listening to them, biases get formed very, very quickly.
No, absolutely. I think that's what was very, very well put. Culture has a lot to do, and for all Aditya, they wanted to see your back.
Yeah.
Say, okay, let this guy come back, tika lagao, so 1 month of lunch done, and we'll get you back. No, but that was thanks. Shubhadeep, there's so much we've been talking about bias, both conscious as well as unconscious. Have you stopped an unconscious bias in decision making, in any decision making, personal or work, and how did you do it?
So, my last job was with a startup, and that's when, after almost working for 16 years, I went into a startup, and that's where I actually realized a lot of biases. I call them big company biases that I had when I joined that company. For example, the biggest thing was when you hire people. I'd been working in big companies ever since, and I've come back to a big company. When you hire people, you hire them for certain competencies, you hire them for certain experience and pedigree. You have your checklist. In that startup, my co-founder at that time, a founder rather, he told me that you have to set everything aside and look at what you're hiring for and who's the best person for that role. Because I know it sounds simplistic, but average age of the company was 24. So you would have to look for the same kind of attitude or maybe potential of a 30-year-old in that company when you hire a 24-year-old or a 25-year-old. The second thing was a cross-cultural bias. So when we set up our Nairobi office, when we started interviewing people, in the first 2 days we didn't like.
In your startup.
Yeah, we didn't like anyone. Then we realized that 1 second, you're not hiring Indians here. You're hiring Kenyans who are very bright Kenyans, but maybe what you're looking for them is very different. And it was a very bias. It was performance bias, saying I want only certain. And then the best part was we ended up hiring a really good bunch of people, and some of them from the first round we had actually said, we'll get back to you later. So these were the two factors. The third realization was exactly the opposite of yours, gray hair bias. It was a reverse gray hair bias in the sense that you would actually let your hair be gray to be accepted. Because so we were a startup and we had to go and pitch for large companies.
Right.
You go to Shell, you go to Airtel, and so on in Africa. And if they see a 25-year-old come in denims, they would not call for a second meeting. Then I said, okay, let's do a reverse gray hair bias and then go and make things work. And it worked.
Did you dye your hair gray or?
No, I mean, I just kind of, I started wearing jackets.
No, that was not a serious question.
But I started wearing jackets to meetings and connecting them on LinkedIn. And I knew that they've seen my profile and our company started getting treated differently. And again, that was a learning of how to break that bias. It was not exactly, so very, very interesting learnings from a startup on biases.
No, thank you. I think that was brilliant. And startup reminds me. I was just seeing a video on LinkedIn again by a Sri Lankan American guy. Chamath is his first name. I can't say his last name. He basically says all startups are a Ponzi scheme. So maybe you wanna take a look at that.
Says the man who made a lot of money out of them.
Oh yeah, he made a lot of money. Initially invested in Google. I mean, he's got a New York accent, and again, going back to my bias of Tamil accent. So, Shalini, often biases impact businesses, right? Especially in a multicultural environment, and you have been in several cultural environments. So, can you give us some examples from your experience on what kind of biases?
Sure. Thank you. And so I'll just go to the genesis of what is this unconscious bias. All of us receive 11 million bits of information per second. And our brain can process only 40 out of those 11 million informations that are constantly bombarding us. Where is the rest going? It is creating some patterns, it's creating biases. So each one of us here in this story have shared our personal experiences of biases which are very real. And they will always be there, conscious and unconscious, because unconscious I cannot even control. Even despite the fact that we will probably be deliberating on things that we can do to overcome the biases, but there will be these biases which will always be collecting at the back of our mind. So coming to your question straight off on how did it impact business, I was sharing a little while ago that in my previous organization where I worked in India, in Schneider, we had most of our support functions at that time were like HR, finance, IT, marketing. We had women. And I'm right now talking about a gender bias. And in our management team, we hired a P&L leader who was a lady. Now, the bias that a P&L leader in an engineering company, a lady, was not acceptable. So every other business leader was out to question her, pounce at her mistakes, smirk and do whatever it takes. But then over a period of time, the competitive spirit, and then the entire rest of the boys club became one because there was no competition between them. But then we saw that competitive spirit that started when the women's numbers started to do well. This lady who was a business leader, the rest of them also accepted her, and she was in an engineering company accepted as one. So what I'm trying to say is that these biases can do a lot of harm to us. When we have these filters and we are not aware of them, we stand to lose. And as we discuss more, maybe we can share more stories. But this was an incredible example where the business started to do well, and we had a woman P&L leader in an engineering company competing with the other men.
No, absolutely. And you talked about out of a million, 40, out of 11 million, 40 examples stick to your head. And, some people like me have only 4 that will stick. You remember, and then you imagine how much more biases I can have, right? So that's scary. We have another 30 odd minutes, and I'll come to you with some questions. But before that, I have a follow-up question for you, Shraddha. You work for a tech company, and tech pretty much claims to solve everything, right? Is there any technology that can identify conscious or unconscious bias?
puts the tricky ones on me. So my pleasure to answer that. And now I speak both as an HR professional and as an employee that I see that happening, right? So there is, of course, what's the best way of solving unconscious bias? Ideally, make it conscious, make people aware, better sensitization, awareness, acceptance, and then you move on. But tech is a great friend. And this I can tell you from both experiences. We have something called Business Beyond Bias. It's a product or a comprehensive framework with which we look at biases across the entire employee life cycle, right? See all 6 phases. Who applies, who we hire, how we manage, how we develop, how we reward, how we promote, who exits out, right? Across this entire SIC. And you can use a very simple lens. PPT is how I call it. It's not PowerPoint. It's people, process, and technology. Every bias, you can look at a technology component. So I think Raj spoke about AI in hiring process, right? Hiring has one of the highest biases, right? And so for example, something as small as we have a technology that you feed in your current job description, it tells you the words that are, because of which a woman will not apply to that technology with that role. So for example, if there's a word which says aggressive in a job description, 90% chances that a woman does not apply. We've always considered sales roles aggressive. I'm assuming, I see a lot of nods in the head. But women don't apply, right? Resume matcher, right? Recruiting folks are also humans. So of course, you know, what is it that you find? If I tell you my background a little bit, I'm an army officer's daughter, you know, 5 sisters, youngest, traveled all over India. Something or the other will click. You will consider it affinity. You will then view me as a different lens. That happens with our recruiters day in and day out. So we have technology which does the first level resume matching, and then it doesn't consider gender, it doesn't consider any of these. It gives you the best possible candidates. I'll give you an example that happened at SAP. There was a team that was hiring. We had said we are open to international stuff as long as they are in APJ, so we're willing to relocate people. Suddenly, your top 10, 8 were Chinese. Obviously, the hiring manager got very nervous, right? They were like, okay, I wanted Bangalore. We said, why Bangalore? Apparently, there's one university in China which is really doing cutting-edge testing stuff. Now, typically, if a recruiter would have been there, that wouldn't have been the case, right? I'll give you another example. Performance management is another huge debate, right? A lot of women talk about it coming back from maternity. So for example, as a manager, you have 10 people. 2 of them have come back for maternity. Even 1 of them has come back for maternity. When you're doing the comp planning, you're doing all 10 assessing across 12 months, which isn't right, right? So people who are maternity, you need to make sure that you're assessing them for 6 months. Now we have the tool and the technology in SuccessFactors that shows up that highlight. So if you're putting in a lesser number, the tool will prompt you. Are you considering this? Now, in most managers, we've also seen it the other way. The minute you have this, the manager gets a bit more aware and then does a corrective action. But if you did not have that, then you're going ahead the way you were going ahead, right? From brilliant hire to black box hiring. Black box hiring, so without the face, you have a voice. We've tested those. So you could look at multiple things in technology. You could look at something in retention measures. Actually, we learned one hard fact. I think the startup boom started really taking corporates' happiness a few years ago, right? A lot of people wanted to try that, and they exited us. Now, we thought that was an aspirational claim, they'll come back. Then we realized not necessarily. But we also realized because the technology told us why they were leaving. So we normally believe people who leave are around, August to December timeframe are writing CAT and getting through IIMs, right? That's not true. And the technology told us because we knew where they were going. So I'm a big advocate of technology, and I truly believe you look at any life cycle, right? Any stage. There is something that technology can do. But technology itself is not your answer. You will need, that is why you need people or your leadership buy-in to take an action on that, right?
Absolutely.
And that's my take.
Now it's very obvious you're a big advocate of technology, and kind of an ambush marketing advocate of SuccessFactors too.
Of
So
course.
I don't know whether you head HR for SAP or their sales function, but that said, Shalini, I'm going to ask you now. With all this happening, this technology, there's this, there's that. How do you actually identify that there is a bias?
Yeah, so I think this is done at a personal level and at an organizational level. because biases are going to creep in the conversation and in the entire value cycle when decision making happens, whether hiring happens, performance management. One example that I was sharing recently was during our performance management, we used to have this negative marking saying so and so is emotional. Now, emotional was supposed to be a bad thing. So somebody is expressing emotion, so he's not worthy enough to be promoted because he needs to be logical, factual, aggressive, and whatever was defined as that stereotype caricature. So how do you assess or how do you identify biases? And I think the way technology is helping us, awareness around this is also extremely important. Because the more awareness that we are able to create, the more we are talking about. And why are we talking about biases today? Why didn't this topic about stereotyping, unconscious bias come up 10 years ago? This is a very new topic in the last couple of years. Because there is a scarcity of resources, scarcity of skilled people, scarcity of a talent, however you may define your talent. The moment there is scarcity, you start tapping on gender, which is not in the workforce, LGBT, which is not in the workforce, differently abled people, which are not in the workforce, cultural, where you are now becoming global. And mind you, this is less prevalent here today because we still are an economy where 65% of our population is below 35. In Europe, they are thriving and they are so obsessed, and even in the US, about diversity and ensuring they have cultural, gender, whatever else diversity that they can gather because there are no people. So this is only going to increase, and self-awareness, tools, suspending judgment, any patterns that we see, and that's why your technology, AI, and all of that is failing because they start to develop patterns.
Absolutely. So very well said. There's so much to identifying beyond just curing them. And for those of you that are standing at the back, there are about 5 or 6 seats here that people vacated because they couldn't stand us talking. So can you come on up? So and I'm going to tell them to lock the doors at the back. So this looks like a full packed, captive audience. Otherwise, Rohit is going to say, "What the heck, Raj?" So come on.
There are more chairs here.
There's some more here. You can
Rohit,
come in.
there's one here.
No, he wants to be with his wife. What do you mean, Aditya? You can't pull them away. They just got married yesterday.
Okay, can I add to that? I think one of the things that I've seen work well in terms of removing bias, and hiring is definitely one instance where there's a lot of bias, but the performance councils, talent councils, where you are debating the talent and saying, should we promote, how should the person be rated? We've seen that that's also another area where quite a bit of bias creeps in. A lot of it is either recency, or I like him, or he did this phenomenal work in some floods that was 6 years back, and that's the reason why we should promote him now. So one of the things that we've done is just before each one of these councils, just before these councils start, we make everybody in the room take an oath. It is really like an oath with a clear sheet of paper with the oath out there, where they're saying, look, I'm going to be factual, I'm going to debate, I'm going to discuss things on merit. Now, the physicality of just doing that, we've seen has tremendously impacted the way decisions get taken in those councils, right? So it's a very simple thing to do, but just by somebody pledging that we are going to be honest and factual and data driven, people start calling each other out, saying, look, you took the oath, but you didn't do that out there. And we've seen that that's kind of impacted quite a bit. So it's not a technology solution, but it's
absolutely.
Absolutely,
mechanisms.
Just to add to that, calibration. So not using single source of data as a moment of truth, and also not leaving every decision for an employee basis the manager's judgment. Because the moment it is based on one person's judgment, even if the manager is the most objective manager, it still has an element of subjectivity. So whether it was selection of high potential for a leadership development program, whether it was competency based, whether it was performance appraisal, whether it's hiring for a critical role, having a panel, having calibrated view, so that, again, calibrated itself means that you've taken different viewpoints.
I know, and in calibration, we believe there is nothing called a group bias, right? Well, not all bias is bad, by the way. Bias for action is a good thing. And before I turn it over to the group to ask, Shojit, I wanted to ask you, at an individual level, or even at an organizational level, what initiatives do you think that drive culture which avoid biases? If we think bias is a bad thing.
Yeah, so I think the first one is at an organizational level, trying to understand what are the biases. We know that biases exist. So, for example, I've worked in companies which have had anonymous helplines, focus group discussions, and really employee inciting on biases. I mean, one wouldn't call it biases because then the responses would be what you call biased, but it's an attempt to first identify the biases. Second is that it starts from leadership. So leadership has to walk the talk. Leadership has to clearly portray that the organization doesn't have a bias. So the leaders, the leadership team, the head of the business, head of the organization has to time and again not just demonstrate that he or she doesn't have a bias, but also remind people in town halls, in whatever forums, that this company doesn't have a bias, and here are some examples. Third is training. I don't know if there are too many companies who do training of employees, communication and training on what are the pitfalls of biases and to consciously avoid biases. Like someone said, biases can be, you only said, in fact, it's not just unconscious biases. I think most of the biases are conscious. It's just that while they are conscious, but people think they're unconscious.
Yeah.
So it needs investment in training and, most importantly, communication. People should know.
No, absolutely. In fact, in one of my previous roles, we were developing a training course to avoid unconscious bias. And the course never took off because we had so much biases, that we could just not get rid of. So, so before I turn it over to you to ask questions, that snap poll thing, is there a way to show if anybody has responded to it? Will it come right at our back, or I don't know where it'll show? Oh, okay. Oh, cool. Do you think unconscious bias is really unconscious?
Yeah. No. 90%. Majority of the people.
Okay. That's what I thought the answer will be. I wrote the question. So is there a second question? All right. So it's... No, I think the first one itself, the Wi-Fi doesn't work very well here, Aditya.
We are on cell network, not Wi-Fi.
That's a
Just so you know,
telecom
this guy works for Airtel. So. All right, so the last 14 minutes, what questions do you have for the four of them?
I love it, the four of them.
Oh, there's a hand going up there. Please stand up, ma'am. Yeah.
Hi, this is Ranjita, and I'm from Rajagiri Center for Business Studies, Cochin. So my question to you is, as you have already
If
mentioned...
you can name who you want to ask, otherwise, see, all five of us will answer the question.
It's actually a common question to all of you.
No, just one.
All right, so I would like to go with you.
You ask for it.
All right, Raghav sir, or ma'am, please. The question will be, as you have already mentioned about the biases when it comes to, it's a pitfall when it comes to resume scanning or hiring people. So when people are already biased, you have already mentioned that, even it's mentioned here itself that unconscious bias is it unconscious or is it conscious? So my question is, when it comes to an organization, do you think this bias can be completely removed? When it comes to machine or humans, which would you prefer? Will it be the machines or will it be the humans?
Now that you have given the answer, what's the question? No. I don't know, Shraddha, you want to take a shot at it?
I take a shot. I think the answer is not or, it's
Please
and.
sit down.
It's and. Technology will help you to some extent, right? You can use it. You get a little smarter, you make sure. So along with all your machine learning, AI related stuff, you need to make sure your recruiting team is diverse. You need to do implicit association tests for them so that they know their own bias. So I'll tell you, as a hiring manager, I know what I look for, and I make sure somebody in my team who's completely different than my personal taste also interviews this person. Because otherwise, I'm associating certain values and weighing them a lot more, right? I learned this the hard way, I must tell you. So there are things that technology can do, but I don't think, like I said, technology is the only answer. You need that awareness in people, and it's not just the recruiting team. You need it in your hiring managers, you need it in your teams once they come into. So you've hired a great person, comes into the team, realizes, not the place to be, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's important, and you can create that awareness. I don't know if you can do it 100%. As we probably demystify some of our biases, maybe there are more that come into my mind. I must admit in absolute candor that I think we rationalize our biases, right?
Absolutely.
Because that makes us feel good.
Absolutely.
So I believe he speaks softly because he's South Indian. See? And we all do that day in and day out. And that's why I think technology, at the time of the decision making, like he said, it's not a class that I put you for 3 days once a year. It's at the time where you're making that critical decision, do you have technology to tell you that you're being biased? That to me is the trick.
But just to add on to it, you can wake up a sleeping dog, but you can't wake up a dog that's pretending to be asleep.
Not just a dog, even my son is like that, So, even I mean, if you ask him, he'll say, even I am like that.
It's a family thing, is it?
So there are 3 hands that are going up. So let's take you first, sir, and then you, ma'am.
Sir, I am from Indian Oil Corporation. In our organization presently, one word is very popular. This is gender sensitivity. And there are some training also on that. I have not attended that training. But I would like to know from the distinguished panel what, according to you, would mean gender sensitive at workplace?
I think we've all talked about bringing it to the awareness. And what Shraddha also said is these are prompts that technology throws out to bring it to our awareness that there is some bias or differentiation or filter that I'm using to be able to see the other person. Now, when it's gender sensitization, I would imagine the training is all around making decisions basis gender. We were just talking a little while ago that many companies also, during their interviews, would check if the person is newly married. There is an assumption, there is a bias that she will start a family and therefore will not be able to do the job. Or if there is a sales position, then aggressive is what is an aspirational need for that candidate. So gender sensitization, which is happening in all organizations, is bringing it to the awareness of what we are doing to differentiate between the two genders, and are these the right decisions? You want to add?
Absolutely. In fact, Aditya was saying before the meeting, sales, aggression, and he said there are fighter pilots in women. And what are you talking about sales, right?
No, actually, one of the things, we were in a very remote place, close to Kargil actually, and it was 100 meters from the Pakistan border. It was called the point 43 or 48, now I don't remember. And we were very excited, we were there, just being as patriotic as we could be.
So what were you doing there?
That's a different conversation at a different time. But what was amazing is, this is like, there's a small group of people. And what surprised me most out there, so it was quite, I felt very patriotic there. But what was surprising was predominantly male. But when I looked at the infrastructure, there were toilets for men and women, separate toilets, marked separately, and right out there. And I asked the guy out there saying, why do you have it? You don't really have any women soldiers out here. He said, we do have officers who come here. Right? So I think there's a little bit of infrastructure also that if you're looking at it from an organizational perspective, are you creating the infrastructure? Are you doing things that make sure that the organization gets more gender neutral?
Thank you. Let's take your question, ma'am.
This is a very interesting question regarding the gender sensitivity. Now, my question is, many a times in the organization, we do conduct a lot of training programs around gender sensitivity. But at Quark, I'm Balneet, and at Quark, which is a software IT company based out of Chandigarh, we had a different set of environment, very young, dynamic people all working there. So we had a situation there when we announced a carom tournament, and we mentioned, okay, the carom tournament for boys, for the girls, and there were a group of girls who came up and said, why is it boys separately playing, women separately playing? Right? And then we also had a situation when we had a women's group meet, and all the men came up and said, when are we going to have the men's meet? So how do we manage those situations and those, biases or those, sensitivities when it comes to the gender or when it comes to the having an equal playing field?
Who wants to take it?
Why are you looking at a woman?
I know. I was generally looking to my right. I know. I would have taken it, but I'm biased now not to answer questions, only to ask. So,
I think it's the approach that an organization takes. For example, and it has to be built in the values and the ethos of the organization, gender sensitivity. And the examples you gave are manifestations of what the organization believes. So if the organization is conscious about gender sensitivity, for example, in our company, we have reduced working hours for women, and which is very fair so initially when the policy started, it was reduced working hours for women, and then we realized that no, it's reduced working hours. Even men might want reduced working hours, it's fine. If they're willing to take a 25% pay cut and work 25% less, why is it reduced working hours for women? So it's just an example of how even in making gender sensitive policies, sometimes we make some inherent biases. So to answer your question, it has to come from the leadership where if it's a carom tournament, then there's no reason why it should be women's and men's. I mean, if the leadership decides that it's a carom tournament and there is no question of men and women playing separately, it's a company culture, it's the way the company designs its policies. And sensitivity is at two levels. One is to be sensitive towards both genders, or all three genders in fact now. And second is not to call it out, because then you're calling it a bias. So if you have a women-friendly policy, then that itself has an inherent bias in it. You just make a policy and let everybody avail that policy, although you might know that the intended beneficiary might be women.
At the GE's Welch Center that both you and I have worked in, we used to have a cricket tournament, and we said if any team has a lady in the team, you get 10 extra runs. And that was a bias. And there was this lady, Aditi Sharma is her name. She came and whacked the boys out. And we said, what the heck? And you whack us up and then you get 10 more runs for it? So that was bias too. So we are down to the last 2 minutes, 39 seconds. So, yeah.
My name is Abhishek, and I'm from our cybersecurity risk management consulting firm. The question is for which Raj touched upon towards the end of the conversation. How do you differentiate between good and bad bias? And just an example, a lot of organizations talk about culture fitment during hiring. So is that a good? It's a bias in some ways. Is that a good bias or a bad bias? And I'd like to
Something in between to a moderate bias, but.
Yeah.
Half my body is in the tawa, rest is in the deep freezer. On the whole, I'm comfortable. You know what that is? So.
But employee referrals are your biggest form of bias.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I think somebody spoke about it in the morning. I heard it when we were at the lounge. It's structured, well-represented, well-paid bias. We have made it acceptable. And we are very proud to show this number, right? But that's the truth. And, there are multiple formats and multiple things that are happening with respect to that. And that's why I think that's where you need to look at, not just look at the process and say, is the process relevant for today? I think one question that I would like to ask you is, we've been following processes that have been set up in a given context. Are we reviewing those? All three genders, right? From infrastructure of having a gender neutral bathroom to saying, would that be? Is your paternity leave, and this is, again, I don't need answers, how many of us have a stronger maternity leave than paternity leave?
So coming back to the cultural issue and about employee referrals, how many of you here have an employee referrals scheme in your organization? Most of you, right? And that is creating an inherent culture of getting the like me people into the organization. But maybe that is what is required. I don't know. I'm not answering it for you. So the only thing I would like you to reflect is, what is the purpose of a policy, of a scheme, or of an employee referral, or whatever you are doing, if the purpose is to create a similar, homogeneous, like me culture, then maybe it serves your benefit. But if you are going to lose business by losing diversity, by losing different thinking patterns, different types of skills and ways of working, then of course it's not helping your purpose.
Oh, fantastic. That way we are 0000 minutes out of our control. But just one last point, the employee referral bit. I've been in several companies with employee referral schemes. Whoever I refer never gets hired. So what is that kind of bias? So with that,
That's performance bias.
That's performance bias against me, I know. So back to you. Yeah, two more, yeah. Wow, that's cool. 63 votes. Somebody is really voting. Right. Unconscious bias could interfere in the following: business decisions, boss subordinate, all of the above. Okay. Cool. Thank you so much. You've been a great audience, and it's been a pleasure.